I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Margaret River Winemaker special series. Across these 4 episodes, recorded in February 2023, we'll be exploring the modern Margaret River winemaker scene in the company of 4 respected producers, giving you the most up-to-date exploration of the region, available anywhere in podcast format. Make sure you're subscribed to be alerted when new episodes go live. We kick things off today in the company of Julian Langworthy of Deep Woods Estate. Julian tells us his origin story before taking us on a deep dive into Deep Woods. We explore the Margaret River winemaker culture before getting a property virtual tour. Julian talks soil types before exploring site and varietal dependent viticulture, and he looks ahead for the 2023 travel plans. Enjoy.
I'm a relatively rare beast. Margaret River in the late 70s and early 80s, when I was born in Margs, was a pretty tiny place. And so I'm a pretty unusual person in Margaret River. I was actually born and bred here. And I went through my childhood years. My father was, I guess he worked as a grapevine researcher, like he was in the ag department in the 80s when the wine industry in Margaret was just sort of kicking out. And I spent a lot of my formative years through some of the great names of Margaret River, like Cullen and Mosswood and Lewin Estate. And, I think my parents were fair score of hippies, really, because Mum was a school teacher and I used to just go to work with Dad and rolled around with that until I could go to school, So, but winemaking never really occurred to me really as a job or profession. And I dutifully went off to university at the University of Western Australia and studied marine biology. And then after, meeting girls that I hadn't known my whole life and playing football and probably drinking in a non-circumspect fashion, I got kicked out of university after my second year. And I went back down south and ended up working at Harvest. And I'm like, wow, this is actually something you can do as a job and a university degree. So had a bit of a cruise around Australia for 4 or 5 months after that, and then went to the UK, worked in Victoria wine stores, as they were called then, and applied for, because I've got a British passport as well. My dad is actually English. He'd moved back to the UK by that stage. And applied for winemaking, and then I did winemaking. And bizarrely enough, it was a lot more up my sort of alley, and probably fairer on the fishes, it would be fair to say, because I wasn't very good at marine biology. But the degree was much more visceral and real and kind of pertinent to me. And all of a sudden, instead of getting kicked out, I was doing pretty well. So that was at the University of Adelaide. From there, I worked a little bit in South Australia.
Okay.
So that's the sort of university for wine, or at least the oldest one in Australia and one of the oldest in the world. And then from there, I worked in South Australia for a couple of years, and then over to France. I worked in the Languedoc for about a year, which was great. Came back to Australia and got my first winemaking job, which was at a place called Wolf Blass in the Barossa Valley, which is obviously a huge, very sort of famous winery, if you like. And there was 6 months. And so at Wolf Blass that year, I think we did 45,000 tonnes. And put that into perspective these days, the whole Margaret River region does about 30,000 tonnes. So that single winery was, 50% bigger than the region I currently work in. From there, I went down to Coonawarra, did another short stint in France. In Coonawarra, I got my first senior winemaking job. I was a senior winemaker at Wynn's Coonawarra Estate, which is a beautiful winery and a place that I learned a huge amount. The head winemaker there then, and still the head winemaker there to this day, is an amazing lady called Sue Hodder. I actually did my first trade trip to the UK with Wynn's in about 2008, which was hugely exciting for like a 28-year-old or whatever I was then, which was pretty cool. And then I had the opportunity to run my first winery. So that was in 2008 as well, and I became the head winemaker and general manager at Knapstein in the Clare Valley. I was in Knapstein for 2 years, really enjoyed it, but the opportunity in that time came up to move home to Western Australia and to Margaret River, which was always my dream. As a relatively naive uni student, I knew completely and totally and utterly that Margaret River made the best Chardonnay, which was Lewin Estate Chardonnay, and made Australia's best Cabernet, which is Mosswood Cabernet. I quite smile at the time at my conviction on such things, but my plan was always to come home and make wine, and that opportunity came in very early 2011 when I became the head winemaker at Deepwoods Estate in the Yallingup Hills.
No, very interesting. I mean, it's always great for me to hear when, a winemaker from the other side of the world has gone and had all of these different international experiences. And as you say, the things that maybe you felt, as conviction in the early days, you've maybe, got the kind of context to put those things in. And I love you've kind of brought us up to the gate, really, of where you're working now, of Deepwoods Estate. Maybe take us inside. I guess introduce us to who are the people there. Who are kind of the names and the people that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. I guess I've been at Deepwoods for over 12 years now, which seems amazing to me because when I arrived, it seemed like quite a little tiny winery compared to the corporate, quite large wineries I've been working at. And the best thing for me is I was a 30-year-old winemaker at the time. I sort of got given the keys to this winery by the boss, Peter Fogarty, who is the owner, and sort of said, I just want you to make great wine. And that's what we've tried to do over the duration. To give you an idea of the scale of the change and size of Deepwoods, the year I started, we made 250 cases of rosé, and last year we made over 20,000 cases of rosé. So that's the sort of the role and the scale. We're probably, and that could be said true for many of the various wines that we make. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride, and there's been all sorts of people along the way, but in our current form, Deepwoods is part of what's known as the Fogarty Wine Group, which didn't exist 12 years ago, but we have wineries in New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, and a number in Western Australia. And I'm the group chief winemaker for that. But from a Margaret River sense, what makes Deepwoods tick, I guess I have a pretty pivotal role in wine style and setting culture for the winery, but then the beating heart of the winery are the two winemakers beneath me, senior winemaker Andy Bretherton and winemaker Emma Gillespie. They're the ones that get people going, drive the dream, make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and do just an amazing job at Deepwoods. Emma's been with us since 2016 and Andy since 2018, and they're just doing an amazing job of making the wines better every day. Then viticulturally, John Fogarty is our group director of viticulture, but he, like me, I'm the group chief winemaker. We're both based at Deepwoods, and he's the primary viti for this site. Does a great job, huge attention to detail, and we work really closely in really trying to get these wines to the absolute best level we can. Probably the most important person of all is the CEO and owner of the Fogarty Wine Group, Peter Fogarty. He's a fairly formidable, inspirational businessman. He turned 70 last year, and he's probably more frenetic than the day I met him 12 years ago. But his sort of superpower, if you like, wineries and the most out of all of us is giving you huge amounts of responsibility. I guess I alluded to it, like sort of given this winery and said, just make great wine. And they're not wines owned by like a mining magnate that have all the money in the world. They're going concerns that need to make money. But if you've got a reason that you want to do something and it's a strong reason, you can make a case for it. It's just one phone call to the top of the tree and you can turn a great idea around in a couple of hours. Unlike corporate world where, you've got 14 gate stages and a bunch of rationale to sort of leap through, if you like. So I guess for Deepwoods itself, what is only a very medium-sized winery, well, it's a big winery for Margaret River, but a very medium-sized winery in the Australian ethos. They're the sort of key drivers that really bring it along. But I guess to that point, great wine is only as strong as its sort of weakest link, and we try really hard. And I think we succeed at Deep Woods, bringing everyone that's there. Like, the guy that runs our bottling line, Tom Bradshaw, what they do in that line to produce, almost zero DO pickup, massive attention to detail. They're all the 5%ers that take you from making good wine to making truly great wine. And all we're really into it for is to make some of the world's best wines.
I love it. Yeah, that's a really interesting deep dive into the people there. And I'm sure we'll, meet those people again as we, get into talking about processes and, how you kind of do what you do really, with that kind of lofty goal that you're working towards. But I think that, something that really stood out for me from your questionnaire that you sent across, Julian, was that shift really in the perception of Deep Woods Estate over the last 12 years since you were there. And, I love the description there of that kind of, relatively unheralded brand that, developed and has evolved. So I wonder if we couldn't just sort of zoom out from that period of time as well and kind of tell that story and, maybe start to uncover what might be some of the drivers, behind that incredible sounding success story.
Absolutely. I guess one of the reasons I came to Deep Woods is it was a winery that had everything it needed to succeed, and including, most importantly, the owner's vision, but hadn't managed to take that next step. Vineyard at that stage was about 25 years or so old. It had a perfectly functional winery, if not a flash one, and it had just, and I guess at that stage it had me, that someone that wanted to really take things to the next level. And then we just really worked incredibly hard on a range of fronts and taken some great people along the way, and had actually like tons of luck. I guess maybe 10 or 15 years ago, Margaret River had the sort of a bit of a glass ceiling of the original sort of brands. So there's 5 kind of brands that have bloomed very large in the pantheon of Australian wine. And I think one of the key things that sort of Deep Woods started making better and better wines, I would suggest. We put huge focus into the viticulture. We put a sort of, like, I came from wineries such as in Cinnabar Estate, that, had really great fruit, and I knew what it looked like, and I knew what we wanted to achieve, and we were given enough rope and largesse to try and really get along that path, and we started having some really good success. I guess probably one of the really glass ceiling moments for Deep Woods Estate, there's a trophy called the Jimmy Watson Trophy in Australia, which is the red wine trophy for the Melbourne Wine Show. For whatever reason, it's over the course of about 40 or 50 years, sort of the wine trophy to win in Australia. And Deep Woods won it with its 2014 Reserve Cabernet, and it's the first time Margaret River Winery had won for years. First time that Cabernet had won it for years and years and years. And I guess we had this body of work and these results and scores and people talking about it under the surface, but that sort of really did, which was in 2016, because the one was a 2-year-old wine at that stage, really sort of break through a bit of a glass ceiling. And instead of, like, I guess, Colin and Mosswood and Lewin Estate, it was a winery that was being mentioned in the same breath. And I guess the presentation we did earlier in the year about the set of people in those rooms is diversified. It hasn't changed, because wineries like Mosswood and Lewin and Cullum are in there too, and they're doing great wines and they're doing wonderful things for Margaret River. But there's that sort of second wave of wineries that maybe the vineyards, instead of being planted in the late 60s and 70s, were planted in the late 70s and 80s, that all of a sudden have these great resources and hopefully a really collegiate way of working with the other wineries in the region, which I think it's gotten better a lot over the last 10 years. We're all going on a common journey to make some of the world's best wines, and that just rises everyone to the top. So that's been a really key part of it. And as part of that, John Fogarty moved down to Deepwoods in 2013 to head up the Viticulture, which got things moving massively quickly. As I alluded to, I had a really great senior winemaker, Ben Rector, another amazing senior winemaker called Dan Stocker, and then Andy Bretherton came on in 2018, and really his attention to detail. He came from some really great training out of Viticulture in Victoria. He was another West Australian moving home, and he really just brings another sense of vitality and excitement, and every day is a new beginning. And we're just about to start vintage 23. I guess that's my 14th vintage year. I guess that's 13th vintage year. And it's just as exciting as the first one. It's like looking absolutely Mickey Mouse excellent out there at the moment. And I think that sense of excitement and that sort of, and there's new people in the winery, got a big pile of beer in the cellar because you've got to keep, your cellar hands hydrated. That sense of excitement and discovery really is what sort of drives great wine. And when you don't have that, it's probably time to find something else and take your talents elsewhere. But for me and for Deepwoods Estate, that's never been an issue.
I love it. You're painting a really positive picture, and I genuinely don't think there's anything wrong with putting that out there. I think as you rightly say, I attended that tasting over in London back in November now, and it was very interesting to as you say, taste. I think it was 7 different wineries, and really get a deeper sense of just how influential, I guess, that corner of Australia is. And that's, I think, as well, always brings me back to the beauty of wine. You can all be over there doing what you do best, and the product of that can reach us in London or wherever in the world in kind of perfect condition. So we were lucky enough to have you guys there kind of talking us through it, but the wines kind of speak for themselves, which I think is really cool.
And it really is, Lawrence, one of the greatest things about being a winemaker. You get to work with a really great, passionate group of people, because people are passionate about wine. And then people such as yourself and even the broader public are actually really interested in what you do. And so each year you're sort of striving to make the best wine you've ever made, which is wonderful. It's not about being repeatable for a winery like ours, or probably any of the wineries in Margaret River and many of the super premium regions around the world. It's about making the best wine. Each year you've got that distinct opportunity, and then we get to share them with people like you and tell us about the stories and what makes those wines special. So it really is a pretty special industry and a lovely one to be in.
I love it. And as I enjoy when it happens. You really kind of set me up perfectly for the next question there, because talking about the conditions and making great wine, and the fact that we're talking here in February 2023, and kind of at the foot of the of the vintage mountain, or however we want to think about it. So I think what would be super cool for me, and hopefully for the listener as well, is to really explore your part of Margaret River there, in terms of where you're getting fruit from, and to really ask that question in kind of two ways. One is, what does it look like? And obviously now is a super important time to understand what it looks like. But then also, what are some of those longer term geological forces that have kind of shaped what that landscape is sitting on top of? And I think that taking those two together will really give us the best feel for what your bit of the world kind of is and what it looks like.
You got it, mate. Well, The curtains are half drawn, so I'm at my house, which is on the Deadwoods property, and it's basically like a bowl of vines, if you like. Now, this side of the property has less on them than the other side because there's lots of remnant forest and it's right in front of the lake. But it's kind of like a half amphitheatre of vines. About 14 hectares here. There's one vineyard on my side of the hill where I'm sitting. That's our Malbec vineyard. But if you think about it, that this hill faces west and it gets the afternoon sun, so it's a warmer site. So Malbec's quite good there. But Deepwoods itself is red wine, or even more specifically, it's a Cabernet and Cabernet blend kind of, nirvana for me. It's this lovely sort of half amphitheatre of north-south planted vineyard. They're all quite mature. The vines currently are going through Braison, so the grapes are all turning from green to purple at the moment, and it's going through really evenly, which is nice. The reason it's going through quickly and evenly is our beautiful weather that we're having at the moment. It's about 28 degrees here at the moment, but even more than that, it's a suggestion that the flowering was really nice and tight and condensed. And with Cabernet, that's really important. And I guess when I'm talking about the sense of place and what Deepwoods property is all about, it's an amazing Cabernet site. We bring our Chardonnay and other varieties in from other sites. But up here in the Yallingup Hills, in the very northern end of Margaret River, it's not hotter than other regions. It probably has lower minimums, but it's probably warmer. And the reason for that, and there's lots of great stuff in Margaret River, and like the shape of this valley is really important because we miss the warm afternoon sun a little bit. So we get all the morning sun to dry out the canopies from the morning dew, which is important to minimise disease. But the really amazing thing about here is Deepwoods is right high on the Yallingup Ridge. So when I say high, it's very high in inverted commas, about 150 metres above sea level. But that's about 100 metres more than most of the premium red regions in Margaret River. The coastal ridge starts to drop down as you head further south. And we've got a dual kind of maritime influence, if you like. So the Indian Ocean's about 5 kilometres further to our west. From my house in the mornings when the swell's running, you can hear the surf magnificently. And then to our north is what's called the Port Geographe Bay. That's a big, flat, huge sort of cape area of sort of sea, if you like. It's not the wild open ocean, but it's a real moderating feature that we have here. And what it does is moderate northerly winds. And so in other areas, northeasterlies can be quite warm in Margaret River. They're the hottest days of the year. But because we're way up in the north near the Northern Cape, when the northeasterlies blow, we actually get moderated over the ocean. So that takes some of the sting out of the place that we live in. Margaret River is like it's like a Venus wonderland, During the ripening period, it's kind of 28 degrees by day, 14 degrees by night. When the temperatures start really soaring in the afternoon, all of a sudden the sea breeze comes in from what is a massive, untamed ocean and just cools everything down. And what we get is beautiful, extended, gentle ripening, and where you can pick wines at the zenith of their ripeness, with beautiful natural acidity without being forced or pushed into picking decisions, which is pretty rad. We still suffer the vagrancies of weather like hail and the occasional cyclone that comes too far south, but it's been a lovely season so far, and that's what Margaret River is all about.
It's so interesting hearing that, actually, Julian, about the moderating forces there that you've got in terms of the ocean, because I've spent some time in Australia, but only ever on the East Coast or in the eastern part, and have been sort of hit with some of those westerly winds over there in January and February, and they're so intense. It's almost like you feel the wind is going to set you on fire. It's like nothing I've ever experienced. So I think there's a lot of conversations about water being that moderator, but I think when you've got a continent of that size, it can do the complete opposite, right? If you're in the wrong, in inverted commas, you're going to be getting this wind that is just the complete opposite, basically, of what you've just spoken about there.
Yeah,
and what about
it's Margaret River. Like it really is this little sort of peninsula that sticks right out in the Indian Southern Oceans, and it really is quite unique in that regard. But the great thing about that is we have got this huge continent behind us, which does have a bit of a drying effect. It doesn't heat us up too much where we are because of the prevailing winds, but what it does do is mean we don't get too much growing season rainfall, which is pretty awesome. We get heaps of winter rainfall, heaps of spring rainfall, but then it really does dry up for the harvest period, which is really what you want. Pretty cool.
I love it. And could you start to take us a bit inside the soils then of those locations, and maybe if it helps, give reference to what might be some of the big geological forces that have maybe shaped several of those different vineyard sites?
So soil type is quite diverse in Margaret River. Well, not necessarily diverse, but change. It's very changeable. You've got a vineyard in one location. So Deepwoods even itself is a good example. So Block 3, which is our absolute best Cabernet vineyard, I'm looking at over here. And then if you look up the hill to Block 7, the soil type changes in Block 3 from a beautiful deep lateritic gravel, which is a type of gravel, probably about 3 to 4 metres of sandy gravel loam over clay, and about 500 metres to the north, there's some almost bottomless beach sand, which is where some Shiraz grows, which is probably the weakest link of our vineyard. So it can be really quite changeable, the soil types through Margaret River, but it's that deep, free-draining gravel soils over clay, which are the really rock and roll substrates for high-quality Cabernet. You don't want waterlogged vines by any means for Cabernet, but what you do need is that water holding capacity within the clay. And something about those soils, they're the ones that really give the wine some verve and structure and a certain, sort of minerality through them, which is the hallmark of Margaret River Cabernet. Margaret River Chardonnay, which is probably our other most famous wines, I guess. It's a bit more diversity in the soil types that we love as winemakers. I actually quite like some of the sandier, free-draining sites for Chardonnay, and for Chardonnay, for me, it's more of a clonal and proximity to the ocean and microclimate conversation, where with Cabernet, if you don't have these beautiful, in my opinion, obviously, everyone's different, if you don't have these beautiful free-draining gravel soils, you're not really in the hunt for the really great stuff. And I'd be surprised if many of the great Margaret River vineyards are not actually on some form of sandy gravel loam or gravel loam over clay, because that is the super soil type. They're not dissimilar to Bordeaux's gravels over clay. They're quite different, but a similar theory around why the Cabernets really excel as this soil type.
Yeah, maybe the logical next step then, maybe going through the lens of Cabernet and continuing that conversation on, would be to explore viticultural practices. I mean, you've already kind of hinted at who is there, who's carrying out the work, but maybe through one or two examples, maybe give us an insight into what does that look like, and how might that differ from different sites, different grape varieties, and as I say, a little bit of a deep dive into your Cabernet.
Yeah, 100%. So here at Deepwoods, obviously I alluded to John Fogarty's the head viticulturist. Also got a great viti here called Mark Grote, who helps with this site too. And then the actual site vineyard manager, who's been here for almost as long as me, about 10 years, Graham Wilson. So there's a lot of people that know a lot about this vineyard. From a super high-end Cabernet point here, it's pretty simple. Pruning is hugely important. So the vineyards are only as good as how much beautiful architecture you can put into them. So we run a single cane prune system, or a single guillot sort of system if you're in France. They're not overly high capacity vines. We generally yield somewhere in the proximity of we aim to produce about 5 tonnes a hectare. We normally about 3.5 to 4 tonnes a hectare, so pretty low in world standards. And what we're looking for in these vineyards is, because it never gets too hot here and never, it's just the Goldilocks of the wine world, it's never too hot, it's never too cold. We're looking for lovely vine architecture, so dappled light through the whole canopy and beautiful fruit spacing. Mm-hmm. So some of the important things we do are shoot thinning in spring to get the right number of shoots in the vine, make sure we've got lovely cover and capacity in the vine, but no density in the canopy, if you like. At the moment, we're going around the vineyard fruit thinning. So this year is so even, I alluded to before, that the flowering was beautiful, but some seasons the flowering can stretch out 2 or 3 weeks. And so quite often we'll take off the green bunches. So we might hit what's called 80% Varietal. And we'll take off all the bunches that are still green at that point because they're not going to ripen at the same speed as the others. Or we might take out some of the clumpy bits from the vineyard, but that's not generally a problem. From there, it's really looking after soil health. Like we do a lot of work on increasing the biome in the soil, doing cover crops that are beneficial for insects, cover crops that are beneficial for soil moisture and soil carbon, and it really is a thing. So we have, if you're out in the vineyard now, the whole vineyard is covered in a sort of mat or a layer of ryegrass. It helps keep the soil temperatures down and helps mulch the bottom of the vine. So the vineyard here is irrigated as we need it, but it really helps the vines sort of stand on their own 2 feet in that regard. So then on the lead up to harvest time, we sort of sample the vines. They get bird netted. There's birds everywhere here in Margaret River. So these vineyards in the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks after we finish fruit thinning will be netted. And then basically at the pointy end of the season, I'll be visiting a vineyard like Block 3. I'll be working rows 3 days a week looking for the harvest date. But the thing about here is that ripening is so lovely and benign and slow. Sometimes it's like, watch Game of Thrones, it's like not today death, like you're looking for that zenith. Because as a winemaker, like once you pick the grapes, all you can really do is fuck them up to a certain degree. Like they've reached the zenith of their potential. And, we've got to crystallise that potential and try and like deliver on the promises that the vineyard delivered us. Really high-end Chardonnay production is similar. We do a lot of cane pruning in Chardonnay as well. Can be a little bit more vigorous in our Cabernet vines, so shoot thinning and things like that are important. Probably the biggest key difference in Chardonnay is from a viticultural point of view, water's quite important. We have to watch the water quite carefully. And also one of the challenges in getting Chardonnay off the vine in time is it's a really intense time of harvest. It's like Sauvignon Blanc might be starting, it's early in the season, and getting hand pickers is really tricky. All of our top Chardonnays are hand picked and whole bunch pressed. And so it's kind of like, like picker wars, I'm sort of trying to extrapolate a week out when I want to pick, which sounds like that should be easy, but the difference in 2 days ripeness in Chardonnay can make the difference in a wine that's going to go to your absolute reserve wine and something that'll be a very, very good wine, but it's not, really hitting the pinnacles of what we want to achieve sometimes. So it's interesting. So I guess another really important thing for Degwoods is rosé. Rosé varietals for us Tempranillo, a little bit of Grenache, Sangiovese, Merlot, and Shiraz. But I guess the viticulture for those is slightly different because we actually grow them in the most sort of eastern sub-region of Margaret River, which is called Carbonate. It's a little bit more fertile than we are up here. They're more red loam sands on the river valley floor, and it's definitely hotter. Maximum daytime temperatures will be often 2 to 3 degrees warmer, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in the vineyard viticultural world, that's tons. So it's actually that warmer aspect of that site, which I think has made some of Fleetwood's rosés really, really, really successful. Like we're Margaret River's biggest rosé producer by a mile, and we sort of identified those warmer sites that get flavour early, but don't necessarily get huge colour and tannin development with the flavour as being really where we needed to go to. And we sort of viticulturally, we sort of treat them accordingly, a little bit meaner, a little bit leaner, and we take them up early at quite low potential alcohol. So they're probably our pinnacles of our sort of viticulture and where we're going with those bits.
And you're doing the right thing, because my mouth has started watering actually as you started describing the rosé and the Chardonnay especially.
What time is it there?
Yeah, loving these descriptions. It's right in the morning, so it's like 10 minutes to 11. So I'm already waiting for noon somewhere in the world.
Well,
to get to
10 to 6 here, and I've already had one glass of rosé. So I feel your pain, and if you want to Australian Standard Time, feel free.
I love it. Yeah, thank you. And just in closing, because as always happens, the conversations that I enjoy the most, they always seem to be finished before they've even kind of gotten started. So hopefully we'll get to pick up at some point in person. But I also do just want to, because of the time of year and because you've got some interesting travel plans ahead of you there, Julian, going to be, for example, rocking up at Pro Wine 2023 over in Germany. So I'm just curious, is that, given all of what we've discussed, I guess, about the brand, its development, the fact that you are, in multiple markets, what does that kind of experience look like for you now? And what is the kind of the main things that you're, I guess, looking forward to about going over and being at a major event like that?
So get through harvest, and I love going to visit people in the trade and other markets. It's always pretty humbling coming from Australia just to see how massive the world wine market is. And you really do realise that you are kind of a relatively insignificant piece of the dynamic, complete play. I guess the thing that's really exciting about that is sort of sharing Margaret River with the world, though. It really is, I think, in our lifetimes going to be heralded from a Chardonnay point of view right alongside the absolutely very best white Burgundies. And that's super exciting. And now I know I'm saying that, but I'm actually a white Burgundy tragic. And the fact that the prices have become so astronomical, it's left a wide gaping hole for super premium Margaret River Chardonnays, and we're seeing that in UK sales at the moment, which is so exciting, so that sort of piece is super exciting. I get around Australia a fair bit. I go to lots of kids' sport in Western Australia, but just getting out there, telling our stories, and doing what I alluded to previously. It's such an amazing rural industry. There's not many rural industries where you get to really value add through the whole chain and brand it your stamp, not even the stamp of your region, the stamp of your tiny little particular place, and then talk to people that are interested about it. So it's pretty cool. I'm actually hoping to get to the UK this year as well, hopefully in September, but I'll let you know if I do. And we can pick up and actually
lovely
do the interview at a more suitable wine drinking time for you, and I'll bring some wine to drink.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Julian Langworthy of Deep Woods Estate. A literally mouth-watering way to get this series started. Do visit deepwoods.wine online, where you can learn more about the project and find their main social media handles. Please help to amplify this episode and the Margaret River Winemaker series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/501. You can, as ever, find links to all episodes from the series in the description below. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wine Podcast on Twitter. Next time on Interpreting Wine's Margaret River Winemaker series in episode 502, I'll be speaking with Glenn Goodall of Xanadu Wines. Make sure you're subscribed to be alerted when the next episode goes live. See you then.